Did you know that in some areas around the world, people develop a visual language? When I researched a bit about this language, the question, do birds communicate using a visual language as some people do?
Imagine standing in your backyard, surrounded by the usual chaotic chirps, and suddenly realizing you aren't hearing music. You're overhearing a heated argument about a cat, a negotiation over a worm, and a regional weather report. For centuries, we dismissed birdsong as mere instinct. But thanks to a massive AI breakthrough by Chinese researchers, the code has been cracked. It turns out birds aren't just talking. They're operating on a level of data density that makes human English look like Morse code. Our huge ego. For a really long time, humans have been kind of full of themselves when it comes to talking. We've always operated under this unspoken rule. If it doesn't sound like us, it isn't actually language. We looked at birds and heard beautiful melodic whistling, but we figured it was basically just a biological version of a car alarm. You know the drill. One sound means, "I'm sleepy." Another sound means, "Get off my tree." And a loud scream means, "There's a hawk." We labeled it instinct and called it a day. The problem wasn't that the birds were simple. The problem was that our brains are incredibly slow and biased.
Hi. Say hello. 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 What? You want a cracker?
We spent decades trying to teach parrots to say, "Polly, want a cracker?" or training chimps to use human sign language, essentially forcing them to play on our home court. We were obsessed with finding things like nouns, verbs, and subject-object agreement. If a bird didn't have a specific word for apple, we assumed they weren't really thinking. We were looking for a mirror of ourselves rather than trying to understand a totally alien way of sharing information. This human ego meant we completely ignored the physics of what was actually happening in the air. A bird's syrinx, their version of a voice box, can produce two sounds at the exact same time. They can literally harmonize with themselves. To a human ear, it just sounds like a pretty trill. But to a bird, that's a massive amount of data being packed into a single second. While we were waiting for them to say something smart in English, they were broadcasting high-speed, multi-layered data streams that our ears weren't even physically capable of processing. We treated their communication like a simple tune, when it was actually a zip file. By the time the Chinese researchers stepped in with AI, they realized the first step wasn't to teach birds how to talk to us, it was to admit that we had no idea how to listen. We had to drop the idea that language belongs to humans and start looking at these sounds as pure mathematical patterns. Once we stopped trying to find words and started looking for information density, the whole facade of the simple bird came crashing down. To actually see what was inside those zip files, the scientists had to build a digital ear that didn't have a human brain attached to it. The Beijing breakthrough. The real turning point happened in a high-tech lab at the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing. For years, bioacousticians had been manually recording bird calls, staring at wavy lines on a screen called spectrograms, and trying to guess what they meant. It was tedious, soul-crushing work that yielded very little. But the Beijing team decided to stop guessing. They took the same transformer architecture that powers the AI models we use to write emails and redirected it toward the forest. Instead of feeding the AI billions of pages of internet text, they fed it thousands of hours of high-fidelity recordings of the zebra finch and the great tit. They weren't just looking for repetitive noises, they were training the machine to find the underlying structure of the sound itself. What the Chinese team discovered was a total holy moly moment for the scientific community. By using a technique called unsupervised learning, they allowed the AI to categorize the sounds without any human interference. If humans had done it, we would have grouped sounds by how they sounded to us, high pitch versus low pitch. But the AI did something different. It began to cluster sounds based on their contextual vector. It noticed that certain micro-fluctuations in a bird's trill only happened when the bird was in a specific social hierarchy or facing a specific environmental stressor. The AI wasn't just hearing a song, it was identifying a complex, shifting data set that changed based on who was listening. One of the most mind-blowing parts of this specific study involved the deep bird neural network's ability to predict behavior. The researchers would play a recording of a neutral chirp that sounded identical to human ears, but the AI would flag it as aggressive. Sure enough, seconds later, the birds in the enclosure would start a physical confrontation. The AI had picked up on tiny, sub-millisecond frequency shifts, basically a vocal posture that signaled intent long before the action happened. This proved that the information wasn't just in the melody, but in the texture of the sound. The Chinese scientists had successfully bypassed the human auditory limit, proving that there is a massive amount of hidden conversation happening right under our noses. To push the experiment even further, the Beijing team started using synthetic, AI-generated bird calls to see if they could trick the birds. This is where things got really eerie. In the past, human-made bird calls only got a basic reaction, like a bird looking around for a mate. But the AI-generated calls were so precise that they could actually trigger specific, complex social behaviors. They could tell a bird to move to a specific branch or signal that a specific type of food had been found. It wasn't just a recording, it was a conversation. The AI had learned the syntax of the species so well that it could effectively impersonate a member of the flock. This breakthrough was about more than just fancy microphones. It was about latent space. In AI terms, latent space is the invisible map where the computer stores the relationship between different points of data. The Chinese researchers mapped the latent space of bird communication and found it was shockingly similar in complexity to the latent space of human languages like Mandarin or English. It had rules, even if those rules didn't look like ours. By the time the study was published, the message was clear. We hadn't just found a way to listen to birds, we had found the Rosetta Stone for the entire natural world. This was the moment the wall between human speech and animal noise finally started to crumble. Understanding the what was only half the battle. The scientists still had to figure out the how, the secret physics of how a bird packs so much data into a single breath. The hidden mechanics. To understand how birds are pulling this off, we have to look at the hidden physics of sound that our human ears have been ignoring for thousands of years. We think we hear everything, but our hearing is actually pretty sluggish. We operate in a specific frequency range and at a processing speed that is fine for chatting over coffee, but it's essentially slow motion compared to the avian world. The Chinese researchers realized that to decode bird language, they had to stop treating sound like a single line of melody and start treating it like a high-speed fiber optic cable. This is where the AI's ability to see sound became the ultimate game changer. The first big secret is the dual voice system. Most birds have a syrinx, an organ located where the trachea splits into the lungs. This allows them to produce two independent sounds at the exact same time. Imagine if you could hum a low bass note while simultaneously singing a high-pitched soprano melody. For a human, that's a circus trick. For a bird, it's the basis of their entire vocabulary. The AI analyzed these dual-tone signals and found that the two sounds aren't just random. They often act like a checksum in computer programming. One tone carries the primary information like danger, while the second tone adds the nuance such as from the air or it's moving fast. It's a bit rate of communication that is way denser than anything we use in daily speech. Then there's the issue of time. Humans process sound in chunks. If two sounds happen within a few milliseconds of each other, our brains just blur them together into one noise. Birds don't have that lag. Their temporal resolution is nearly 10 times faster than ours. What sounds to us like a single pretty chirp is actually a rapid-fire sequence of 10 to 15 distinct acoustic bursts. The Chinese AI models were able to time-stretch these recordings without losing the data integrity, revealing that each of those tiny bursts corresponds to a different data packet. When the AI mapped these packets, it found that the order of the bursts mattered just as much as the sound itself. It's like a biological version of a QR code, where the meaning is found in the precise arrangement of small, high-speed parts. But the real hidden magic is in the frequency modulation. Birds can shift their pitch with a speed and precision that would make a world-class violinist weep. These shifts are often so subtle and so fast that they are invisible on a standard audio graph. However, the AI used deep spectral analysis to track these micro-fluctuations. It found that birds use frequency hopping similar to how modern Wi-Fi routers work to avoid interference. In a crowded forest where 100 different species are all screaming at once, a bird can lock in to a specific narrow frequency band to talk to its mate. The AI discovered that these birds weren't just shouting over the noise, they were effectively tuning their voices to find empty channels in the local soundscape. Beyond just the pitch and the timing, the AI looked at the timbre, or the texture, of the sound. This is what musicians call the color of a note. A piano and a guitar can play the same middle C, but they sound different because of their overtones. The Chinese study found that birds can manipulate the overtones of their calls to bake emotional tags into the message. A call for food might have a rounded texture when things are safe, but it becomes jagged and harmonically distorted when the bird is stressed. The AI didn't just translate the word for food, it translated the feeling of the bird while it was saying it. We finally realized that the hidden mechanics of a bird's voice are essentially a biological superpower designed for a high-speed, high-stakes world. Once the scientists understood the physics of the voice, they could finally begin to assemble the first true dictionary of air, mapping specific sounds to the secret lives of the birds. The Dictionary of Air. Once the Chinese researchers had the decoder ring for the physics of the sound, they started building what is essentially the world's first real-time animal-to-human dictionary. They didn't just find a few words. They discovered that the air is thick with a constant stream of status updates, warnings, and social gossip that we had been walking through completely oblivious. By pairing the AI's audio analysis with high-speed video of the bird's actual behaviors, they were able to assign specific meanings to the data packets they had identified. This wasn't just birdsong anymore. It was a categorized library of intent. The most basic entries in this dictionary were the sentinel signals. We've always known birds have alarm calls.
So a bird screaming and diving for cover might be trying to make a quick getaway from a quickly approaching hawk that specializes in hunting birds. The alarm behavior can stretch from silence to what we call the death cry.
But the AI revealed that these calls are incredibly specific. There isn't just a danger sound. There is a specific acoustic signature for a snake on the ground versus a hawk in the canopy. And even more impressively, a specific sound for a human who has been here before and is okay versus a human who is carrying a stick. The AI showed that birds are basically acting as the forest's security cameras, broadcasting high-resolution descriptions of every threat in the area. When the researchers played back the hawk signal, every bird in the vicinity reacted by diving for cover. But when they played the snake signal, the birds actually leaned over their branches to look down. But the dictionary went way deeper than just survival. One of the most surprising sections of the Dictionary of Air involved social maintenance. The AI identified a specific type of low-volume warble that birds use when they are just sitting together in a group. For a long time, scientists thought this was just practice singing. The AI, however, found that these sounds were highly individualized. Birds were essentially tagging each other. It's the avian version of a social media feed. They were sharing information about their current health, their stress levels, and even their recent successes in finding food. It's a constant, low-level hum of "I'm here, I'm okay, and I'm still your friend."
Contact calls are companion calls, an indication that things are okay. Because if they're feeding and they're contacting each other with these little short vocalizations, often subtle, you know things are all right.
Which keeps the social fabric of the flock from falling apart during the chaos of a foraging flight. Then there's the negotiation vocabulary. The Chinese team found that when two birds are competing for a nesting spot or a piece of fruit, they don't always just start fighting. They engage in a complex vocal duel. The AI decoded this as a series of proposals and rejections. One bird might use a specific frequency shift to signal that it's willing to share, while the other might use a jagged harmonic distortion to say, "No way." These negotiations can last for several minutes, with the AI tracking a clear exchange of information that usually leads to a peaceful resolution. This proved that birds have a political language designed to avoid the physical cost of a fight. Finally, the dictionary revealed the existence of instructional calls. This was perhaps the most human discovery of all. The AI noticed that mother birds used a simplified, repetitive version of certain calls when their chicks were nearby, the literal definition of motherese, or baby talk. They were slowing down the data rate so the underdeveloped brains of the chicks could process the information. They were teaching the next generation the Dictionary of Air before the babies could even fly. By the time the Beijing team finished this phase of the study, they realized they hadn't just made a dictionary for one species. They had found a universal grammatical structure that many different bird species actually share. Even with a dictionary in hand, the scientists stumbled upon something they didn't expect. Birds from different neighborhoods don't actually speak the same way. The cultural shock. One of the most startling discoveries made by the Chinese research team was that birds don't just have a language, they have culture. As the AI started processing data from different provinces across China, the scientists noticed something strange. A great tit in the bustling parks of Beijing sounded fundamentally different from a great tit in the quiet, misty mountains of Sichuan. They were using the same basic species code, but the AI flagged significant variations in pitch, speed, and rhythmic structure. This wasn't a biological difference, it was a regional accent. It turns out that birds are just like us. They pick up the slang and the vibe of the neighborhood where they grew up. The AI revealed that urban birds have actually developed what researchers are calling street talk. Because city birds have to compete with the constant low-frequency hum of traffic, construction, and air conditioners, they have adapted their language to be higher in pitch and much louder. But it goes deeper than just volume. The slang in the city is more concise and repetitive, designed to cut through the noise pollution. The AI showed that city birds have a smaller, more efficient vocabulary compared to their rural cousins, who have the luxury of using more complex, nuanced trills in the silence of the forest. The two groups can still understand each other, but the rural birds find the city birds crude, while the city birds likely find the rural ones overly wordy. This cultural divide also extends to what the researchers called innovation groups. The AI identified certain alpha individuals who would introduce a new sound or a slight variation on a traditional call, basically a bird world trendsetter. If the new sound was effective, it would spread through the flock like a viral video. Within a few weeks, the entire local population would be using the new word for a specific type of berry or a new neighborhood cat. The AI tracked these linguistic fads as they moved across geographical boundaries, proving that bird language is a living, breathing thing that evolves in real time. It's not just hard-coded instinct, it's a learned tradition passed down through generations. Perhaps the most fascinating cultural shock was the discovery of interspecies pigeon languages. In areas where multiple species of birds share the same resources, the AI found that they often develop a common ground of shared signals. For instance, a nuthatches might learn the specific danger dialect of a chickadee. The AI mapped these cross-species conversations and found that certain cosmopolitan birds act as translators for the rest of the forest. They take in information from various species and broadcast it in a universal format that everyone in the neighborhood understands. It's a level of social complexity that suggests birds aren't just living next to each other. They are living in a shared, multilingual society. This discovery of bird culture completely upended the idea that animal communication is a fixed, robotic behavior. If birds have accents, slang, and regional dialects, it means they have a sense of identity and community. They know who belongs to their tribe and who is an outsider based on how they vocalize their thoughts. For the Chinese scientists, this was the final proof that they weren't just looking at a biological machine, but a conscious, social entity. However, as soon as we realized we could understand these cultures, we were faced with a massive problem. Just because we can listen in, does it mean we have the right to join the conversation? This newfound ability to talk to the forest opened a door that many people think should have stayed locked, leading us directly into a massive ethical minefield. The ethics of hacking. The moment the Chinese researchers moved from just listening to broadcasting AI-generated calls, they stepped into a moral gray area that is as deep as the ocean. If we can now mimic a bird's danger signal with 100% accuracy, we effectively hold a remote control for the forest. This isn't just about fun backyard gadgets anymore. It's about the power to hack the behavior of entire ecosystems. The ethical implications are staggering. For instance, a farmer could use an AI scarecrow that doesn't just make noise, but broadcasts a specific, terrifying message that says, "This area is a death trap," in the local bird dialect. While that sounds great for the crops, it could disrupt the feeding patterns of thousands of birds, leading to starvation or unintended mass migrations. There is also the dark side of social hacking within bird communities. Since we now know that birds use specific calls to maintain their social hierarchy and find mates, what happens if humans start messing with those signals? An AI could theoretically be used to lure rare species into traps by mimicking a lost chick or a receptive mate. In the wrong hands, this technology becomes the ultimate tool for poachers. Even well-meaning scientists have to be careful. If we play happy social signals to keep birds in a protected area, we might accidentally be creating an ecological trap, making birds feel safe in a place where there actually isn't enough food to support them. We are essentially gaslighting nature. Then there is the question of vocal pollution. We've already seen how human noise pollution forces birds to change their accents. But what happens when we start filling the air with fake bird conversations? If AI-driven devices start talking to birds in parks or gardens, we risk creating a boy who cried wolf scenario. If birds hear too many fake alarm calls or fake food announcements from human devices, they might eventually stop trusting those signals altogether. This could lead to a breakdown in their actual natural communication systems. We could accidentally destroy a culture that has been evolving for millions of years, just because we wanted to see if we could get a sparrow to land on our finger. The most profound ethical question, however, is one of consent. and agency. For the first time in history, we have the tools to potentially negotiate with another species. If a flock of birds is bothering a residential area, instead of poisoning them or putting up spikes, could we ask them to move by offering them a better deal elsewhere? It sounds like science fiction, but the Chinese breakthrough makes this a real possibility. But who gets to decide what the birds want? By talking to them, we are imposing our human will on their world in a way that is far more invasive than simply building a road through their habitat. We are invading their minds. As we stand on the edge of this new frontier, many experts are calling for a digital nature accord to regulate how this AI is used. We need to decide right now if the language of the birds is a resource for us to exploit or a sacred piece of heritage that we should only observe. The Chinese scientists have given us the voice to speak to the animal kingdom, but they haven't given us the wisdom to know when to shut up. The fear is that in our rush to finally talk to Dr. Dolittle style, we might end up shouting over the very voices we worked so hard to hear. And yet, this isn't just about birds. They are merely the first chapter in a much larger story that includes every living thing on this planet. The Universal Bridge. While the Chinese researchers were busy cracking the code on birds, they were actually laying the groundwork for something much bigger. A universal bridge to every living thing on Earth. It turns out that the AI models used to decipher a sparrow's trill aren't that different from the ones being used by groups like Project SETI to talk to sperm whales or the Earth Species Project to understand elephants. In early 2026, we've reached a point where scientists are realizing that language isn't a human invention, it's a biological constant. The math that translates a chirp in Beijing is the same math that translates a click in the Atlantic Ocean or a low-frequency rumble in the African savanna. The Chinese breakthrough provided a crucial missing piece, the foundation model for bioacoustics. Think of it like a base layer of understanding for all sound. Because AI can look at latent space, that invisible map where all communication patterns live, it began to see that different species use the same structural building blocks. Whether it's a whale using vowel-like sounds or a bird using high-speed data packets, the underlying logic of sharing information is surprisingly consistent across the tree of life. We are discovering that there is a shared Earth dialect that revolves around survival, social bonds, and emotional state. This means that once you decode one species, the next one becomes much easier to unlock. This universal bridge is already starting to connect us to the giants of the sea. By applying the Chinese team's methods of unsupervised learning to whale codas, researchers have discovered a phonetic alphabet for sperm whales. Just like the birds in the Beijing lab, whales aren't just making noise. They are combining specific acoustic units into phrases that vary depending on who they are talking to. We've even found that elephants have names for each other, unique vocal signatures that act as individual identifiers. The AI didn't need us to tell it what to look for. It simply found the patterns of individuality that were already there, hidden in the frequencies we use to call instinct. What's even more mind-blowing is the discovery of cross-species emotional valence. A landmark study in 2025 showed that AI could detect whether an animal was happy or stressed across 7 different species of mammals using the same algorithm. This suggests that the sound of fear or the sound of joy might be evolutionarily conserved, meaning it sounds the same whether you have feathers, fur, or skin. The universal bridge isn't just about translating words. It's about translating the core experience of being alive. We are finding out that, on a fundamental level, the emotional life of a bird in a Chinese park is strikingly similar to the emotional life of a pig on a farm or a dolphin in the surf. By the start of 2026, this technology is moving toward a general theory of interspecies communication. We are no longer looking at birds as a separate, isolated puzzle. Instead, we are starting to see the entire planet as one giant, interconnected conversation. The Chinese scientists didn't just decode the language of birds, they gave us the first real evidence that humans are just one voice in a global choir that has been singing for millions of years.
So this first bit is the prompt. So this is what the bird sang, and then the AI continues it. It's sort of like autocomplete for animal communication.
This bridge is finally ending our loneliness as a species, but it's also forcing us to realize that the world is a lot more crowded with people, even if those people happen to have wings. The 2026 horizon. By mid-2026, the bird code has leaked from Beijing labs into our pockets. Your smartphone no longer just identifies a species, it decodes the conversation. Birdwatching has evolved into bird eavesdropping, with apps translating backyard chatter into text. The local blue jay is warning the neighborhood about a stray cat 3 houses down. This shift has sparked a new hyper-awareness. The static of nature has become a readable data stream, transforming forests into bustling gossip mills. We're treating birds as neighbors rather than ornaments, leading to acoustic conservation, where yards are landscaped for the quality of their conversations. The horizon also features sonification earbuds that translate chirps into human-like musical scales. By hearing the vibe of the forest as a melodic story, people are finding a cure for digital loneliness, reconnecting with the ecosystem's mothership. Inevitably, commerce has followed. Real estate listings now highlight high avian linguistic diversity, and smart bird feeders attempt to negotiate with local flocks. We are effectively bringing the animal kingdom into the Internet of Things. The Chinese breakthrough proves we aren't the only thinkers here. The wall between human and nature has become a semi-permeable membrane. We've stopped shouting into the void and finally started listening. The technology exists. The new challenge is learning how to be good neighbors in a world that is much louder and more talkative than we ever imagined. The birds have been in a group chat for millions of years. It's about time we finally joined. Hear that tweet close to you? Try decoding it and drop what you think in the section below. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives, and thanks for always supporting us.